didn't have any like. Hi everyone, welcome to Morning Mindfulness Week 3. Many thanks again for joining us. We hope you all had a very restful week. We also hope that you found the first 2 workshops informative. And as always, we welcome any feedback you have. So just a quick note on question and answer periods. After receiving some wonderful feedback from our program participants last Saturday, we wanted to give you a quick update on the new format for our Q&A sessions. So we'll be making these sessions more interactive as opposed to a work session. Before we open up for questions, Dr. Rizk and I will briefly review the previous week's content before opening the floor for discussion. As a note, these will be video sessions. We will have our video on and anyone else that wishes to as well, but this is not required and the Q&A will not be recorded. So please bring any questions, comments, or even personal anecdotes to share with us and the rest of the group on Saturday. And so as a reminder, this Saturday we will be discussing the last week's topic of choosing healthier strategies. So this week we're looking at the concept of resilience, and we'll be taking a more in-depth look about recognizing and exploring our current stressors. This is particularly exciting as we're now moving into more self-reflective parts of the planner, and you will have some homework this week that's a bit heavier than previous weeks. So do please take your time with this, listen to the session again if you need to, and please don't rush. If you're not finished by next Sunday, don't worry. We can all share our experiences in the Q&A with this one. And so, and in the coming weeks as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and self-reflection. So with that, let's get started. So let's briefly explore the concept of resilience. So this quote here from the planner says, by anticipating that life will present challenges and building your ability to bounce back from them, you can do more than just survive. You can bounce back from adversity and thrive. So why does this matter? Well, resilience is the ability to bounce back after being blindsided or overwhelmed by adversity. One of the ways to improve our ability to bounce back is to be fully aware that challenging and difficult events could happen to any of us at any time and proactively consider how we might cope with them. So this is not intended to increase anxiety about what could go wrong, but just to recognize that many people have experienced these life events and successfully move forward with their lives. For example, most of us know individuals who have experienced serious illness, disability, or loss, and then bounce back to enjoy and appreciate life more than ever. We probably also know people who experienced a setback or disappointment many years ago, yet continue to experience anger or hurt about it every day or ruminate over it. Our quality of life is directly affected by our ability to move forward with a crisis in a way that supports our own mental well-being. And so, one of the topics of discussion that often comes up is resilience just a way to blame the victim? And so some used to think so because of the way it was applied in some organizations. For example, we'll continue to have a toxic relationship or workplace or classroom, and you just need to become more resilient to put up with it. This is sometimes said to people who were bullied or teased or humiliated or pressured with unreasonable demands in their workplace. And the message was, you need to suck it up or toughen up. You need to be more resilient and less sensitive. In other words, let's blame the victim. But those who use this approach may have missed the real point of resilience. And, many of these things are a part of our life. So we won't be able to avoid them all. So rather than see resilience as blaming the victim, begin to see it as empowering the human. Resilience empowers the individual. You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can choose the response. Resilience isn't going to help you avoid stress, but it'll help you recover from it. Life is a series of events where we make choices and decisions related to our quality of life and well-being. Resilience helps us choose positively rather than negatively. There's no doubt we'll suffer loss and trauma, of course, but resilience allows us to feel it, experience it, and move beyond it. Regardless of your life circumstances or your workplace, building your own resilience will really help you to have a better quality of life. And, you all deserve that. So just to, read from the slide here, resilience is the capacity to adapt or recover in the face of adversity, trauma or tragedy, threats or harassment, stress or overwhelm, relationship problems, financial problems, health problems, work or school issues. So next we'll be looking at the section, recognizing and exploring your stressors and why this matters. So this is the next section of the planner that we're moving into. And so resilience here is we're talking about the ability to bounce back after being blindsided or overwhelmed by adversity. One of the ways to improve our ability to bounce back is to be fully aware that challenging and difficult events could happen to any of us at any time, and proactively consider how we might cope with them. This is not intended to increase anxiety, but what could go, or think about what could go wrong, but it's more to recognize that many people have experienced these life events and do successfully move forward with their lives, and we want to be here to help to support you all do that. So for example, most of us know individuals who have experienced a serious illness, disability, or loss and mental health challenges, and then bounce back to enjoy and appreciate life more than ever. We probably also know, people who experienced a setback, like I said, many years ago in my previous example where I was talking about, experiencing anger, but then continuing to feel hurt about it every day. Our quality of life is directly affected by, our ability to move forward from a crisis in a way that supports our own mental health and well-being. And this part of the planner is really where we're starting to focus on these things that we're talking about.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So at this point, we invite you to turn to your planner, starting on page 13. And as you notice, it's going to begin with looking at school stressors. So if this doesn't apply to you, if you're not a student and you don't anticipate having any stressors from school, you can just skip right over this page and go to page 14, where the planner asks you to think about some of your social stressors. And I think for many of us, social stressors are a huge part of our lives. I know for myself as a Lebanese Canadian, when I was looking at this list and filling it out, one of the things that was interesting to me is that for me personally, I found that family, as much as it can be a source of support for me, it was also at various times in my life a stressor, especially thinking about cultural clashes I might have had growing up, the fear of kind of disappointing my family or certain expectations that my family would have had on me because of cultural or religious expectations. So again, you may find some of these relevant to you, you may not. There's always the other box where you can include social stressors that you may find that are not on this list. And again, you'll see health is on this list as well. And I think health is always something that I personally stress about, especially when it comes or when it's related to my family members. For me personally, that's a huge stressor. Moving forward on page 15, the planner asks you to look at any kind of financial stressors, work or emotional stressors. It is also mentioned on this slide, but I think it's just worth noting and reiterating that this activity can oftentimes, ironically, be more stressful. So the act of actually recognizing your stressors can induce more stress, but we recognize that, and you may feel that, but we encourage you to just push through and to do the activity, because doing this allows you to actually begin to take more control over your life, and again, begin to recognize, oh, like maybe this part of the financial part of my life is really stressing me out, or maybe this part of my work life is really adding stress to my life. So, we can't change or fix anything in our lives until we actually recognize what the problem or what the stressor may be. And again, it's just also worth noting that if you are feeling extremely overwhelmed, please do reach out for help. And on the slide, you'll see the phone number to Crisis Service Canada. And then, so the items that were listed on the following pages, as we mentioned, can be significant life stressors. And this could happen to you. This could happen to someone you care about. There may be times in your life when you have different stressors, but you might be managing quite well. There may be other times when we only have one stressor, but it's super overwhelming. And so really, there's no ideal number of stressors, and there's no right or wrong way to actually feel about them. So again, check any items that you are dealing with now or that you might be in the very near future. And at the end, once you've taken a few minutes or however long you need to complete this activity, choose one of your stressors to explore further for potential solutions later in this session. You're going to complete right up to the end and then read the section titled, "Please don't compare your stressors to anyone else." So again, this isn't a competition. We don't win for having the most stressors. It's not a, who has more stressors is the winner. What we want you to do is actually to not compare your stressors to anybody else, just to recognize that this is a personal activity, and we want you to identify them so that they become issues that you can address rather than a source of anxiety for you. And it's just important to remember that life is very fluid and it can change at any time. So what we want you to do, what we hope you will do, is to build resiliency to cope with any and all of life's stressors. But this is not sort of a one-off activity. This is not, okay, I spend half an hour, I do the planner and I'm good. This is a lifelong learning activity. And so what we hope you do is that you carry these practices into your daily life and moving forward. So we just invite you to think about the 3 current stressors that you would like to focus on for the exercises that we're going to follow. So choose whatever you think is most relevant to you in your life at this moment in time. So the next few slides, we want to talk a little bit more about stress management. So when it comes to dealing with stress and adversity, we have choices. And these choices can be classified as one of the 4 A's. So accept, avoid, alter, or adapt. So some less helpful strategies might include, for instance, problematic use of alcohol, cannabis, other substances like junk food, sugar, caffeine. It also can include binge watching TV, Netflix, or anything else that's not really good for your well-being. And as much as we find like these strategies may be helpful in the immediate moment in time, they can actually distract us from whatever is causing the stress. But they rarely, if ever, make things better, and they often can make things worse. So if, on the other hand, you can just step back at a time of stress and objectively consider potential approaches, then you may actually begin to gain some perspective about what can be done. So we can use these 4 A's shown here, again, accept, avoid, adapt, and alter, to really just help us do that with any of the stressors that we've identified so far. And each of these 4 A's could potentially make things better or worse for you. The exercise is intended to help you identify options that could eliminate or significantly reduce your stress without causing other stressors. So we're going to just kind of go through them a little bit more in depth at this point. So accept. More specifically, we're looking at accepting the things and people that you really cannot change. This one is personally hard for someone like me, who is more of a type A personality and expects sort of a certain level of control over my life. And oftentimes I have to be reminded that sometimes I just have to let go, right? As they say in Frozen, you just got to let it go and accept the things in your life that are out of your control. And that has been a personal challenge and something that I continue to work on. And so I'll give you an example of a story from my friend. So my friend wanted to be lighter. She wanted to lose 20 pounds. She was really hard about herself. She was beating herself up for it. And at one point, she decided to accept that that was who she was. If she really saw being thinner as important to her health or happiness, she would do something about it. But instead, she wanted to focus on enjoying life. She made the decision to accept the way she was and stop wasting energy on it. And sometimes the best way to deal with the stressor is honestly just to accept it. And as hard as it may be, and it can be very hard, accepting what is not possible to change in the moment, rather than desperately or just hopelessly wishing it were different, can actually allow you to manage your stress more efficiently and effectively. It can also help to see our ability to accept and rise above a challenge to learn and grow. So, like you didn't get that special assignment you'd hoped for, or, what did you learn from the process of applying that you could do differently next time? Sometimes just talking about it helps, right? Sometimes just simply telling someone, oh, you're not at your best, is a way to start the conversation and reduce the hold of your emotions that they might have on you. So for example, if you want to kind of dig deeper on this on your own time, the link that you see on the slide is a link to more about forgiving someone who has hurt you. And this was written by the late Dr. Wayne Dyer's blog. Dr. Singh, did you have anything you wanted to add about acceptance personally?
No, I think that's great. I think your explanation was great, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, just to reiterate what's on the slide, the big thing I think with acceptance is just try not to control the uncontrollable. If it's out of your hands, just accept that it's out of your hand, and look at these challenges that you might encounter, whether it's school, work, relationship, social, as opportunities for personal growth and learning. And don't be shy to share your feelings with people that you trust to help reduce that power, reduce the power of those stresses over your life. And I think one of the biggest things is learn to forgive and move on, and forgive yourself, forgive others, and try not to hold any grudges, and just try to be at peace with the things that happen in your life. Second one is avoidance. And so avoid unnecessary stress. Some may think that avoidance is never an effective way to deal with stressor, right? Like that's not normally something you're told is, okay, avoid stress. But sometimes it actually may be one of the healthiest coping strategies. So for instance, if someone's causing you significant anxiety, sometimes avoiding that person, if you can, might actually not be a bad thing. To give you another example, like if you are a recovering alcoholic, right? Calling ahead to a hotel that you're going to be staying at and asking them to remove alcohol from the minibar in your room can actually reduce your stress. Sure, you may not be avoiding the temptation, but you're also saving your willpower for things that you cannot avoid. Not all stress can be avoided. And I think we all realize that some stress is just inevitable. You may have financial or you may have health issues that can get much worse if you avoid dealing with them. But when you're looking at the 4 A's in relation to your stressors, don't discount avoidance as an option. Sometimes saying no to a potential stressor, like attending an event, for example, that you really don't want to go to, can actually be incredibly empowering. Consider how good you might feel once you've made the decision not to go to do something that wasn't serving you in some way. So the message that we're trying to get across is that avoidance or avoiding is also about, setting healthy boundaries for yourself, deciding to eliminate or to reduce the time spent doing things or hanging out with people that are a constant drain on your energy. And I think we can all think of situations or people where you just, that if you go to this event or if you talk to this person that they're going to deplete a lot of your energy. And sometimes just for our own personal stress management, it's best to avoid those people. And avoiding stress may also mean avoiding places that raise your stress level. For example, one student found a corner in the highest floor of the library where almost no one ever went. And then, they would use this hiding place as a sanctuary whenever this particular student had to focus on difficult tasks. Whereas the rest of the time she studied with her friends in a fun, noisy environment and loved it. So again, we have to be able to understand what works best for us, what we need to avoid. And it might just be that you need to write this out and think about, your to-do list and make sure the tasks are what you really need to do and drop the rest. So ask yourself, who do I really need to talk to? Where do I really need to go? I mean, again, under this pandemic, these are unprecedented times. This is not a normal situation, but, even after this pandemic has come and gone, it's important to really think about where and who are bringing us energy and who are depleting our energy. And, we oftentimes, and I do this myself, tell ourselves that, everything is important. I have to do all the things. I have to talk to all the people, but that's rarely true. And sometimes we just have to learn to prioritize ourselves. The third A is altering. So learning to alter the external situation. So what this means is that it's important to look for ways to alter or to change how you communicate and how you operate in your daily life in order to minimize stressors. So I'll give you a personal example. And, Dr. Singh, if at any point you have another example, feel free to chime in. For me, social media has been a huge stressor at times. So I remember at one point logging into my Instagram, for example, And just, seeing all these people on vacations, taking trips around the world, just kind of looking glamorous at all times. And, we all know that social media is definitely not an accurate reflection of someone's reality. It's not someone's 24/7. It's just a glimpse into their lives. But, I found it at times, it was very hard to tune out that noise. And every time I log in, it was almost like, it was a reminder that, oh, I'm not on a vacation, or I'm not living my best life and I should be doing more. So, what I personally did to adjust, because I didn't want to lose the ability to connect with my friends and family over social media. I like that part. But what I chose to do was just manage the kind of content that I would consume. So I unfollowed immediately people or pages that caused me to get, irritated, or who kind of, brought out more stressors or had a negative message. And I just decided to focus and follow on the people and pages who I thought would bring me joy and happiness. So connecting more with family and friends, or, strangers on Instagram who might inspire me to make better life choices, whether it be working out more, or eating healthier, or just in ways to improve my career. I just wanted to alter the kind of content that I was consuming. Dr. Singh, do you have any kind of situations about altering, or does the social media resonate with you?
Well, so for me, mine is a little bit different, but yeah, I'll share my story. Thank you. So, one of the things mine is, COVID related and related to the social distancing and quarantine situation. So one of the things that I'm finding that I need to alter, especially with regards to my home environment, is I'm finding it very difficult to have a work and off time balance because we're just home all the time. And so I find myself working more than I should, working beyond the 8 hours. Mm-hmm. And so that is creating a stressor for me. Mm-hmm. That is a stressor for me currently, because where you work and, where you're spending your leisure time, they're all in the same place, and you don't really have that luxury of going out, taking a break, or just walking around Winners, like, you and I were discussing the other day, mm-hmm. or just, going to Michael's, which is my favorite store, and just kind of like taking that little stroll even around the neighborhood or along trails. You slowly start to lose your motivation to do these things. And then a lot of the lines with work in home, they sort of just blur. Mm-hmm. And so I'm finding myself personally working on this in terms of altering my home environment and making sure that I set those boundaries with regards to work time and off time. And especially in COVID, that's really difficult. So yeah, that's definitely something that I'm going to be, using the 4 A's to work through in terms of that. That's my greatest stressor right now. Yeah.
I think you make a good point. I think to some extent we're all sort of altering, forcefully, I guess, our day-to-day life. But, I think it's important that, we realize that we can all alter how we operate in our home and our work, our study environments, by just kind of clearing away this unnecessary clutter. And then trying to surround yourself as best you can with the things that are neutral or positive for you. So for example, a friend of mine had delivered a freezer chest to a friend's home and then put it in her kitchen. And she didn't want it there, but she couldn't move it herself. And after realizing she was, ticked off every day it wasn't there, she decided to hire someone to move it. And just by altering this daily stressor, she was better able to cope with some of the more serious and difficult stressors in her life. So consider just finding new ways to sort of alter your life stresses. Try not just to make it about a complaining session, but what can you actually do? Like, what's a positive spin that you can take on this? Take the pressure off of yourself in more intentional ways, and ask yourself, like, what's the worst thing that will happen if you don't spend another hour on that report, for example? Or, it's important to communicate, to tell people when a situation is causing you stress. Tell them what you need for it to be healthy for you, whether that's, again, a work thing, a family thing, a social thing. So for example, in a work context, that might mean that you actually need to close your office door or barricade the entrance for your cubicle for a while to get something done. Maybe you need people to move their talking and socializing out of your hearing range so that you can just focus and relax in your own way. While many of us, Dr. Singh, you're talking about this, is continue to work around the clock, especially now when most of us are at home. Sometimes just planning a 5-minute break every hour can make a world of a difference. So I think the key thing from this slide is really just think about how you can plan your day to allow for this to alter, changing whatever routines that you need, and just avoid getting sucked into time-wasted conversation or email trails. You really need to set boundaries. And so the last important A is adaptation. And so adapting your internal thought process. And so adapting basically is about modifying the ways in which we interact with our stressors. And so sometimes it's as simple as just changing your thought process. And so I find myself, for example, like when I'm in a situation out of my own control, sometimes the best thing I can honestly do is to adapt. And so, for example, when I started working more hours, I became very stressed out because I couldn't maintain my previous workout schedule that I was able to do when I worked from home more often. And so what I did was I adapted. I decided, it wasn't reasonable for me to expect that I was going to work out every day right after work in the same way I was able to do when I was working from home. So I adapted my schedule. I set reasonable expectations 3 times a week, and it just made sense for my current situation. And so sometimes, as the slide points out, it's important to reframe problems as a desired solution. Consider potential consequences, looking at the bigger picture, but just be reasonable and have reasonable expectations and standards that you set for yourselves. So for instance, how might you adapt to the stress of sleep deprivation if you don't have the luxury of sleeping longer? I mean, that's a reality for a lot of people. And so what you can do is to focus on the ways to improve the quality of your sleep, even if you can't improve the quantity. To give you some examples, darkening your room, having no electronics nearby, not watching screens for 3 hours before you go to sleep, or whatever it is that might work for you. Just find solutions to reduce stress rather than focusing on the problems like, oh, there's not enough hours in the day, or other things that you can't solve. And so, we ask how each of the 4 A's can make your stress better or worse, because sometimes when we're stressed, we're spiraling into action, but we fail to see that certain actions can actually create new stressors. So for example, angrily confronting someone may seem reasonable when you're stressed by their words or actions, but however, those actions may ultimately break down that relationship in ways that are even more difficult to fix later. So sometimes we need to adapt our own high standards or self-imposed demands. And that might mean lowering the bar to a more realistic level, and that can have astonishing results. That might mean keeping your work or your study within a reasonable daily limits, and that might allow you to engage much more fully in other parts of your life, making you, a better employee or a better student or a better friend, whatever that may be. Sometimes we just need to adapt.
Thanks, Dr. Rizk, for that insightful explanation of the 4 A's. I really appreciated that. Thanks so much. So, now that we're, thinking about the 4 A's as Dr. Rizk explained them to us, you might be asking, what's the difference between alter and adapt? So, I think that is a reasonable question. They could sort of seem confusing, but so adapt applies to you, personally changing the way you interact with the stressor, whereas alter focuses more on changing the stressor. For example, in relationships, you may alter the relationship by changing how often, when, or where you meet. You can adapt to the relationship by modifying how you communicate or interact with the other person. So, just to give you a quick example of the difference between alter and adapt. If the stressor is difficult communication with your parents or a spouse or something, to alter the situation, you may prefer text, email, or a phone call at specific times. You might say to your parents or your spouse, I'm working really hard right now and need to focus during these hours. Let's plan to connect at this time on this day. So if you can alter the communication, you may need to adapt by saying to yourself, I won't answer the call when I'm in the middle of something. When I do answer, I'll take a deep breath, be polite, and just allow my parents or my spouse or my friend, whoever it may be, to speak without reacting to them. So now we're moving on to the more, workbook sort of aspect of this section of the planner. So on page 19, we invite you to take the stressor that you identified earlier, that Dr. Rizk asked you to put 3 stressors aside. So those that you have chosen, so we're going to ask you now to think of its pros and cons and use this chart to briefly, describe the stressor for which you will explore your options. And so you're going to consider how each of the 4 A's that Dr. Rizk explained to us, accept, avoid, alter, adapt, how they might make your stress better or worse. So, perhaps you use a coping strategy that's more damaging than healthy or helpful. So what you want to do is you want to consider all the 4 A's and how they might help you manage your perspective of the situation and reduce your stress level. The 4 A's are used by, many institutions, businesses, and organizations because they work. So we're asking you to, take a moment and really thoroughly sort of analyze and assess those in this workbook activity. And so just a friendly reminder that next week's workshop will be focused on how to balance your support network. And so we also ask you to join us next Saturday, May 23rd from 12 to 1 p.m. for the live Q&A about this week's workshop. And remember to bring any questions, comments, stories, anything you might have for us. And, please don't feel pressured to have this activity completed by then. We can, have a discussion and share our experiences with it, or perhaps work on it together as well. It's open for all sorts of things. And so we hope you guys have a wonderful, restful week. For our Canadian listeners, we hope you have a nice Victoria Day holiday tomorrow. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. See you guys on Saturday.
Thank you very much. We'll see you on Saturday.